How's it going, everybody? Hope you're doing well. In this video, I'm going to respond to Cosmic Skeptics more about my community post video, which is his response to the backlash he's received from his YouTube community post announcing he's now quit veganism. I have already made a response video to that community post, which you can find in the description if you need more context on this. As expected, Cosmic's video is a cringe fest, full of level 0 carnage nonsense. I'm not going to respond to the whole thing, because he does a bit of rambling and repeats himself. So I'll just respond to what I believe is the core of his message there, that is the actual excuse. And I'll also respond to some cringy things he said about animal ethics and the appropriateness of shaming others. Without further ado, here we go. So what is the actual excuse?
My problem is not with the idea that every nutrient that's required to be healthy can be found in a plant-based diet. I think that it can. My problem is with the practicability of maintaining it for myself. All that happened was in practice, in my life, I found it difficult to maintain a healthy plant-based diet. That's it, really. Because of the fact that it is easier to get the nutrients that are required to be healthy on a non-vegan diet, which, say what you like about it being easy to live healthily as a vegan, which I believe in many cases it can be and is, it is easier to not be one.
So that's it. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Alex's reason for quitting veganism basically boils down to, it's easier though, and my own convenience is more important than the lives of other sentient beings. To be fair with Alex, he does say he's been suffering both physical and mental health issues that add to his current level of inconvenience.
Now, for most of my life, I've had a particular set of health issues, just like most people have some health issues that I must stress are unrelated to veganism. They're not caused by veganism. I had them before I was vegan. It's nothing like that. But for instance, one of the most important or relevant here is IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome, which people have to varying degrees. I've suffered with it quite severely for most of my life. It's not been as bad as I've been getting older. I mean, I don't want to mention it, but I mean, I want to mention it in this context, which is that there have been various things that have happened in my personal life that at points have led to something of a mental health crisis. I don't really know what to say here because I'm sorry, but I'm just not going to give you the details about that.
Then he goes on to mention a list of symptoms that he admits may or may not be attributed to his diet.
So I ended up experiencing a lot of the typical symptoms that you hear in these kinds of videos. Fatigue, insomnia, I just wasn't sleeping properly, I was experiencing brain fog, I was unable to properly focus, I was feeling physically weak, having a lot of bloating and a lot of gas, like a lot of gas. I was experiencing joint pain.
My brain wasn't functioning properly.
I was experiencing all kinds of things that I found it very difficult to know what was being caused by my diet.
If all these things are true, Alex does have my sympathy here. It's not good to experience any of these things, it would suck. Now, I'm not an expert in nutrition, so I won't get into the details of any of the health claims made there. However, I will say this, and I'm sure this is something that Alex won't disagree with. There are vegan ways to deal with those issues. Sure, it might be inconvenient and it might even be hard at times. But dude, you don't just throw your ethical convictions out of the window every time life gets a bit difficult. As Nietzsche used to say, he who has a why can bear almost any how. If you have a clear why in why you're vegan, which would be that animals are morally worthy beings that deserve a right to their own existence just as we do, you will find a way. There are many examples of vegans that find a way to live with debilitating physical or mental health issues. Just to name two that I follow personally, Lifting Vegan Logic has Crohn's disease, which has similar symptoms to IBS, and he's a committed animal rights advocate. Vegan Gains has suffered from suicidal depression since he was a kid, and still he chooses to be a light among men by spreading the vegan message and being vegan for over 10 years. In my case, I am a broke-ass graduate student that lives in Puerto Rico. I have managed to remain vegan after major hurricanes and earthquakes that hit the island and left most of it without electricity. I can't even begin to imagine how convenient, compared to here, it must be to be vegan in the UK. And still, I have been vegan for 7 years straight and I'm committed to be one forever because I have my why. Animals matter too. My advice to people like Alex that live with debilitating ailments that add to the already somewhat inconvenient reality of living in an unvegan world is to seek help, either from others in the vegan community, online, or from professionals like plant-based nutritionists, dietitians, or psychologists if we're talking about mental health. Why wouldn't this be your first option if you truly have an interest in not violating the rights of the innocent? Having this said, I strongly believe that Alex has never had a strong view on why is it that we shouldn't exploit animals. I'm not sure he was ever vegan in the first place, just plant-based. So this leads me to the second part of the video, which is on his cringy takes on animal ethics. As I mentioned in my previous video on him, he openly believes that animals shouldn't have rights in the same way humans should.
So I don't really think it's probably a helpful thing to do to argue that animals have a right to life, certainly not in the way that humans do. To say that animals have a right to life, I'm not sure I can stand by that.
And he often goes by the Vegan Society's definition of veganism, except that he alters it for it to accommodate his utilitarian normative ethics.
Most people define veganism, at least the Vegan Society defines it, as a minimization or an exclusion to the highest extent practicable of all forms of animal exploitation. I like to use the word animal suffering there.
So, for those of you who aren't aware, the Vegan Society's definition of veganism is a philosophy or way of life which seeks to exclude, as far as is possible or practicable, all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals. Many animal rights advocates have pointed out by now why relying on this definition is problematic. The most obvious issue with this definition is that it only talks about animals. So if we were to find a group of sentient beings that weren't animals, it would be vegan to holocaust them under that definition. This is something that would go against most vegans' moral intuitions. If we were to holocaust aliens or Santa's elves, for example, I would presume that most vegans will say that this action is not only unethical, but non-vegan. Another issue with this definition, and the more relevant one for this video, is that it uses what vegan YouTuber Ask Yourself calls words of vague obligation, like practicable or possible. These words are completely arbitrary. Someone could say that because being vegan is a bit difficult or inconvenient at times, that makes it impracticable. And depending on what that person's own definition of impracticability is, they would be right. This is exactly what happened to Cosmic Skeptic.
My problem is with the practicability of maintaining it for myself.
This is why I personally avoid using words like practicable when talking about veganism, because it gives people the idea that exploiting animals is justified if being vegan meets whatever arbitrary line you define as impracticable. Also, when he does provide a definition of his own, he makes sure it doesn't have any trace of deontology or rights-based concerns in it, even going as far as admitting that shooting an innocent elk could be a vegan action.
So we already grant the idea that to be vegan is just to minimize animal suffering to the highest extent that we can, which means that if there were a situation in which the way to minimize the amount of animal suffering was to go and, shoot the elk, then go and shoot the elk and call yourself a vegan for all I care.
Who exactly grants this idea that being vegan is to minimize animal suffering to the highest extent that we can? This idiosyncratic definition of Alex also uses words of vague obligation. Can is just another way to say possible, so it's arbitrary. And I believe that most people that call themselves vegans don't only care about this idea of minimizing suffering, we also care about protecting their fundamental rights to life and not to be exploited. That's why I prefer to define veganism as a logical extension of human rights applied to all sentient beings, or as an applied ethical position that advocates for the extension of basic negative rights to sentient beings, which is the Nutrivore's definition. Alex is still claiming that being vegan is just to minimize suffering and to oppose factory farms, which is what I mean by cringy views in animal ethics.
Like, I still want to encourage people to be vegan. I still want to encourage people, of course, to care about animal suffering and to help bring about the end of factory farming. Like, the fact of the matter is, I still think animal suffering matters greatly. I still want to see the end of factory farming as soon as possible.
No. Let's advocate for the end of animal exploitation, period. If we were to give a group of humans an overall positive life in a free-range farm, would it be ethical to holocaust them all for hot dogs? If not, what's true of animals that, if true of humans, would justify this kind of treatment for the latter? You have never succeeded in providing an adequate answer to this question because you know that there isn't one. Anyways, the last thing I want to respond is to some things Alex said about people shaming him for his actions.
And on that point, I should talk about some of the reactions that I've received just from the statement that I put out. I mean, there have been some responses that have been perfectly fine, you know, disappointed or trying to understand or whatever. But, I mean, you don't need me to tell you that there's been a great deal of hatred and vitriol. You can see it for yourself. Of course, what you can't see is the things that people are messaging me privately. Maybe I can show some examples on the screen. It's been relentless, and sometimes from from quite established figures, like, you know, blue tick vegan advocates sending me messages saying that I'm, quote, fucking retarded.
The thing is, Alex, if we hold certain ethical principles to be true, and we are trying to advocate for the adoption of certain societal standards when it comes to the treatment of animals, what comes along with that is that your actions are going to have social consequences. If you're going to decide to be an asshole to innocent animals by torturing them and murdering them, people that believe that what you're doing is horrible are going to shame you. It's that simple. Shame is just one of the tools that we have as a society to promote pro-social behavior. You should be shamed for your actions, Alex, just like you should be shamed for your actions if you decided that being racist or homophobic or transphobic is okay.
As well as, I saw that vegan teacher said that if we were living in a time where it was still legal, she'd be calling for my public hanging.
Now, I won't speak for the vegan teacher as I don't know the full context of what she said there. But in principle, I think I agree with her. We should protect innocent animals from predators such as you. I just believe that there are better ways to go about that. Ideally, we could persuade you to be vegan again, or for the first time. If all else fails, then in an ideal society, I think that you should be thrown in jail and force-fed vegan food, just as in this society, we throw cannibals like Jeffrey Dahmer in jail and force-feed them food without humans in it.
The thing that I want people to be careful of here is, like, how is this going to look to other people? Like, I still want to encourage people to try veganism. I still want to encourage people to join the movement against animal suffering, against factory farming. But imagine somebody's on the fence about becoming a vegan. You know, they're not really sure whether it's going to be for them or not. And then they see what's happened here. Right? They see somebody who says, look, this wasn't working for me for various reasons, and I need to let you know about that. And seeing this kind of response, seeing this kind of this hatred and unforgiving vitriol, what is that person going to think?
I don't know, Alex. That's just an empirical question. It could be that the opposite of what you're assuming is true. It could be that people don't take veganism as seriously if you're just some wimps who claim to have certain ethical principles and defend certain societal standards, but then don't care enough to be angry when people violate those standards. Imagine a feminist that doesn't get angry when a public figure decides to be sexist. My own intuition is that vegans are going to have a harder time being taken seriously if we're not passionate about the thing we claim to be passionate about, that is animal rights. Anyway, that's all I have for today. People should encourage Alex to get off his echo chamber and speak to competent vegan debaters, such as Ask Yourself, Dr. Abby, or Vegan Gains. They are trying to get a hold of him to try to challenge his new views, but it just seems like he's just dodging anyone with a brain, preferring to chat with people like Michaela Peterson instead. If I want you to take anything away from this video, is that you should always avoid using words of vague obligation in your animal rights advocacy, such as practicable, possible, necessary, etc. Those words have very arbitrary meanings, and you will risk creating fake vegans like Alex who think that it's justified to go back to murdering animals every time they perceive that being vegan gets a little too inconvenient. Down in the description, you will find a link to Ask Yourself's video on words of vague obligation, as well as a definition preferable to that of the vegan societies. Secondly, if you have health issues, please seek help instead of violating rights. Thirdly, don't discourage others from shaming people who decide to be assholes to animals. And lastly, and as always, eat pussy, not animals.